Remember Farm Aid? Willie Nelson's concert initiative to help farms in crisis? It started back in 1985 and has been going ever since. It raises about $1 million a year through its annual festival, the proceeds from which go to farm-facing organizations around the country. The first Farm Aid concert took place on September 22nd, 1985 at the Memorial Stadium in Champaign, Illinois. It was organized by musicians Willie Nelson, Neil Young, and John Mellencamp, along with activist Dave Matthews, as a benefit concert to raise funds and awareness for family farmers facing economic difficulties during the 1980s farm crisis. The event attracted a crowd of around 80,000 attendees. Additionally, the concert was broadcast live on television and radio, reaching an estimated audience of over 1.5 million people. The success of this first event that raised nearly $9 million led to subsequent Farm Aid concerts being held to support family farmers and raise awareness about agricultural issues. Farm Aid also has a hotline that farmers can call when they have a problem or a crisis. 1-800-FARM-AID or 1-800-327-6243. The hotline has been active since Farm Aid started 38 years ago. Today, we talk briefly with the hotline manager, Caitlin Arnold Stephano, about how the hotline works to help farmers and about a new Spanish language program to help farm workers who don't speak English as a first language. What kind of calls does the hotline get?
We get a very wide spectrum of calls. We get anything from real crisis calls to more just stressful situations that have built over time. We get a lot of financial calls, so a lot of looking for funding, needing funding for a specific project or equipment, or a financial hardship. So something has happened, maybe someone on the farm has gotten injured or gotten sick and isn't able to be working in the same way. We do get quite a few legal calls, so facing foreclosure or having a difficult time with their FSA loan or, with a contract, something like that.
The FSA, Farm Service Agency, is a U.S. government agency providing support to agricultural producers through loans, subsidies, conservation programs, and disaster assistance, ensuring food security and rural development.
And then a lot of beginning farmers. So a lot of farmers who are still starting out in their first 10 years and just needing lots and lots of resources. And then some people that just want to talk to us, that just need a listening ear, someone that they know understands farming, understands what it's all about, and they can just kind of talk through their situation or what they're feeling. And we provide that too.
And what kind of volume are we talking about?
Yeah, we average around 70 calls per month. It varies throughout the year, but in 2022, we got 829 calls for the year, which was a 40% increase from 2021. So it depends. It depends on what happens in a year. If there's a lot of disasters, a lot of climate disasters, we will see an uptick. We do take a lot of disaster calls, right after something has happened or in the weeks following. I would say with ongoing drought and wildfires, those calls have gone up throughout the last few years. 2022 and this year with inflation, I think really drove up the number of calls because farmers were just crunched, still are. Feed and all of their inputs and costs were so much higher, as well as buying food for their families. So yeah, it depends on time of year. Right now it's kind of slow because it's planting season and baby season for livestock. So we tend to get less calls around this time, and then end of summer it'll start going up again throughout the fall.
So they're too busy to address problems right now.
Yeah, unless it's real crisis. But yeah, a lot of farmers around this time, even if things are challenging, which they are always, yeah, they're too busy to even sit down and try to figure out any solutions. It's just like a get through the days.
Yes. So what would be what you say, what's like a real crisis? Tell me what you mean by that, because obviously there are some practical phone calls like I'm having a financial issue or I'm dealing with FSA or I'm doing X and Y. What merits a real crisis?
Well, it's interesting because someone might not call us and say, I'm in crisis right now. They might not say that out loud, but what they're telling us is my husband was injured a year ago and he hasn't been able to work on the farm since. We haven't been able to find adequate help. Inflation is driving up everything. We can barely put food on the table. I'm worried about making our loan payments. So they're telling us this like kind of longer story of things that are stacking up. And by the time they're calling us, it really is at a crisis point because they can't pay their bills and they can't put food on the table. So we consider that a crisis call, even if the person doesn't say, I am in crisis. And then, of course, there's like suicidal calls where the person is having suicidal thoughts and is talking to us about that. So that is obviously, I would consider a crisis call. And then there's like the legal, unfortunately, farmers will often wait until it's too late to call us, and they'll call us when they're about to be foreclosed on, the next day or the next week. And unfortunately, it's too late for us to really do anything. But we consider that definitely a crisis call because they're calling us saying, I don't know what to do. This is happening. And unfortunately, often they're calling us way too late for us to be able to help in that situation.
So for the farmers who are calling you in a timely manner saying, I have this issue, I have this problem, we have financial problems, there's inflation, I can't feed my family, what kind of resources are you able to provide them?
With the financial ones, it's really, really tricky because there's not a lot of assistance out there. A lot of times farmers won't qualify for assistance in their state through the government because their income is a little bit too high, especially if they're working an off-farm job. We offer an emergency grant to farmers in financial hardship on a case-by-case basis, but it's a Band-Aid. It's going to give some temporary relief, but it's not a long-term solution. If there is another farmer hotline in their state or region, we will often tell them to call that one because it's more localized and they might know of more financial resources that we don't know about. There are some other organizations that offer an emergency grant, like short-term financial assistance that we will refer to if they're in the right area. 211 we use a lot. So if someone is, really dealing with can't pay the heat bills, can't pay, put food on the table, we'll see if their state 211 has anything that we don't know about. But yeah, the financial, it is very difficult because there really isn't a lot. It's not like there's a government fund out there for farmers who are struggling that they can apply to. That doesn't exist. And there's so few grants available to farmers for the basic, like the infrastructure, the equipment, feed. It's really hard to find grants for that stuff. A lot of that is going to come through loans.
What Caitlin is telling us is a great case for what the For Farmers movement is doing with grants to farmers. We have heard the same thing from so many farmers from across the United States that what they need is support to help them get through a rough patch, to fund infrastructure like fences and gates and electrical wiring or water systems. These grants are not big enough to purchase land or to revolutionize the farming system, but they help in ways that farmers really need and can't find elsewhere. I will leave a link in the show notes so that you can learn a little bit more about the For Farmers movement.
So if for some reason they don't qualify for an FSA loan, or they're not able to qualify through their farm credit, their local farm credit or bank, there really aren't very many options. And that's why we get so many financial calls, because farmers are struggling financially and there is not much out there to help them.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm curious about this because I I know that the rate of suicide among farmers is higher than the general public, quite significantly. And I think what you've described is a spectrum of issues. So you have, hey, I've got a financial problem. Hey, there's an injury on the farm and we don't have the workers we need. There are these sort of practical issues that create stress. And there's really no day off for farmers. So there's just a tremendous amount of pressure. Maybe it's their family's land. They don't want to lose it. All of that stress sort of builds and builds and builds. And so I think that when we're talking about farmers, there are all of those stressors, and then there's mental health, and there's an intersection between all of those stressors adding up to just too much for an individual or a family. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit, like how you deal with that. Like if there's a major mental health crisis or there's a suicide call versus some of the more like quote unquote practical, like we have this problem we've identified.
Yeah, the mental health piece is also very challenging because a lot of rural folks do not live within close proximity to a mental health care provider of any sort. We also know farmers are typically less willing to talk to someone that they don't know. So talking to a stranger, talking to a professional is not something that they're typically going to feel comfortable with right off the bat. We work very closely with the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network regional grants, which was funded in the 2018 Farm Bill. Through that, there has been an outcropping of voucher programs for farmers where states are now offering 6 or 10 mental health sessions for free to farmers. So farmers can apply and then they can get these set number of sessions for free, which is great. It's great. That didn't exist really before. However, if that mental health professional doesn't know anything about farming, it's not going to be helpful for the farmer to talk to them, and they're probably not going to keep going. If a mental health professional says, oh, it sounds like you really need to take a couple weeks off, or, oh, have you thought about changing careers? This sounds really stressful. A farmer is just, that's not helpful. That's not what they need to hear. They need to be talking to someone who understands what it is to be a farmer today in America. And so we are really trying to figure out how can we get more mental health professionals trained up in the language of farming and the experience of farming so that when a farmer contacts them to become a client, they can really understand to a degree what that person is going through. So that's the mental health piece. It's very tricky, very challenging, changing slowly, improving slowly, but has a long way to go. If we get a true suicidal call, we all have basic suicide prevention skills. We're going to ask, where are you right now? What is your physical location? Is there anyone around you that you can call that can be there within 10 minutes or that I can call? At a very, very extreme point, we may call 911 if we feel like that person's life is in danger in that moment. I don't even think we've ever had to do that. We're going to try to do some sort of call where we're on with them and on with another person, either a friend, a family member, someone maybe affiliated with their church if they go to church, another farmer that they trust, a neighbor. But again, we don't get a lot of really actually suicidal calls. It's more the longer, this happened. Now I am very stressed and I don't know what to do.
Suicide among farmers is more than 5 times higher than in comparison to the general public. Most of the farmers I've spoken with have a family member who ended their own life. Often I hear from farm families who cite financial hardship, perpetual farm stress, debt, and other common farm issues as surrounding the suicides. That's not to say mental health is not an issue, but stress, tremendous, persistent stress, is prevalent on family farms day in and day out. So when you're talking to someone on a phone and they have, an issue that you can actually refer them to something, what's your relationship with them going forward? Do you have follow-up with them? Do you stay connected, or is it more of a, hi, I understand your problem. I have 3 resources you can try. Let me send them to you or whatever.
Yeah, it's more of that. Although we send way more than 3, it's usually like 25. And we're really looking at local, regional, and national resources. So we kind of split it up. In my replies, I always do local first. Like, here's what you're going to find right around you, and then regional, and then national. Sometimes we hear back from people. We always say, please follow up if you have more questions, or if you can think of anything else that you're wondering about, or call us back or email us back. We don't hear a lot back. So it's typically that call. We do get a lot of, thank you so much. Wow, this is really great information. I wouldn't have been able to find this all on my own. So we do get replies of gratitude. We moved away from a case management model a few years ago, just because it wasn't sustainable for us in the way that we're running the hotline. And that's something that's missing. We called them farm advocates. And back in the 80s, during the 1980s farm crisis,
the 1980s farm crisis was a severe economic downturn in agriculture, driven by oversupply, high debt, low commodity prices, and interest rates, forcing many farmers, more than 200,000 family farms, into bankruptcy and foreclosure. The crisis had a significant impact on rural communities and the agricultural industry in the United States.
That's where that term really came from, because there were former farmers or neighbors or folks in the community that really stepped up and became farm advocates, meaning they would work with a farmer through a full crisis or legal situation, even if it meant 2 years of working very closely with that person, sitting down at their kitchen table, going through bills, going through papers, talking to lawyers. And now, 2023, we have very, very few actual farm advocates still alive and still working. There's a couple. And in Minnesota's a very lucky state. Minnesota has a farm advocate program where they have 10 now. I believe it's 10 people that farmers can call their cell phone and they will drive to their farm. But that is rare. Minnesota is amazing. If someone calls me from Minnesota, I'm like, great, I have so much for you. But that's sort of an exceptional standout. Ideally, we would have that in every single state, but we do not.
And they're part of Farm Aid?
They are not. Nope. Called Minnesota Farm Advocates, and they're through the Department of Agriculture.
You recently added Spanish language to your hotline, and that's new. And I know that there are a lot of big immigration issues going on with farmers. I saw tomato fields in Florida have been vacated with fruit on the vine. Very serious issues. What was the impetus for adding Spanish language, and is it up and running? What's been going on?
Yeah, it's up and running. We started that in October. So Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern. Folks can call and speak to someone in Spanish on the hotline. The impetus was our partnership with the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network Northeast, which is called Cultivemos. It really has a focus on farm workers and making sure our resources are really accessible to non-English speakers or non-native English speakers. So we got funding through that partnership to fund our Spanish hotline. It's something we had been talking about for several years and just didn't have the funding to do. And now we have it through the Farsan grant. So we're really excited about that. We also recently translated our free online resource tool. It's called the Farmer Resource Network. So that's free for anyone to use. You can search our database of resources nationally, and that's fully available in Spanish now as well.
I will link this resource network and the hotline in the show notes, and it will also be available on the For Farmers Resources page at forfarmersmovement.com. With the Spanish-speaking requests so far, what's the response been?
It's been slow to get going. We need to do a lot of outreach around it, which we have been, but Farm Aid isn't known for its work with farm workers or Spanish-speaking farmers in the country. So it's a shift, and it's something we just need to continue getting the word out so that people know that they can call us and we have that resource available. But it's slow, but I knew it would be a slow build, and we've been doing a lot of outreach about it. So we're going to continue to do that and hope that it becomes a resource that folks know about.
What's going on in terms of Farm Aid and the way we all know Farm Aid and how it started with concerts and whatnot? What's going on with that now?
Yeah, so we still do our concert every year. It's every September. That's still a huge part of the organization. And the funds that we raise from the festival, we re-grant out to organizations around the country pretty much immediately. So we have the festival in September, and then we do our granting process in October and November, and the funds are sent out. So we grant out about $1 million right after the festival to smaller organizations around the country that are working with farmers.
And are those then some of the organizations you might refer farmers to on your hotline?
Yeah, lots of relationship building there.
Farm Aid distributes its funds to a variety of organizations that are focused on supporting family farmers, promoting sustainable agriculture, and addressing related issues. Some of the types of organization that Farm Aid has supported in the past include farm advocacy organizations, rural development and community organizations, food and agriculture nonprofits, environmental and conservation organizations, youth and next-generation farmer programs, as well as crisis relief organizations. I remember the first Farm Aid concert so vividly. Willie Nelson, particularly memorable to me back then, in his authentic power, drawing attention to farmers and the need for all of us to support them. I was entering college that year and had no idea how farmers would eventually capture my attention. Farm Aid and Live Aid, that provided relief for famine in Ethiopia, took place in the same year, following a model established by George Harrison a decade earlier to raise relief funds for Bangladesh. Other such concerts, including Live Aid and others, continued to address disasters, poverty, gun violence, and more. Farm Aid has continued to produce a concert benefiting America's farmers every year since its inception. With the addition of their Spanish-language resources and helpline, Farm Aid is helping to serve the 107,000 Latino-operated farms in the United States and the more than 1.25 million Hispanic agriculture workers in the United States, approximately 63% of all agriculture workers in the United States, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the latest USDA Census of Agriculture. You are listening to Talk Farm to Me, where we join farmers and other farm-facing experts to learn more about farms, farming, big ag, small farms, and where you intersect with all of it. At the dinner table, for sure, but also in our natural environment, how it can be better sustained for the long haul, our local communities, especially the idea that urban and rural need to be better balanced in terms of economic strength, and our American culture. I hope that you enjoyed this episode, which I think you did because you're still here. So let me ask you to do me a big but really easy favor. Share this episode with a friend. You can share it right from your app. By sharing it or leaving a review on Apple or Spotify, you'll be helping farmers be heard and known, and issues that affect them and all of us to be understood and addressed. Thank you for being part of Talk Farm to Me. I am your host, Dana DePrima. Talk Farm with you again next week.